As writers, we're always looking for more information on how to write. We want to do it better, we want to do it faster. And a lot of times people will ask me, what's your single best piece of writing advice, Dave? Well, I've helped hundreds of writers become New York Times bestsellers and get their books turned into movies. So let's just take a look at what I think is probably the single best piece of advice that I could give a writer. The single best piece of advice that I have for you actually has to do with the process of how you actually write a story. Most new writers get themselves into trouble when they sit down to write. They don't get into what I call the writer's zone, okay? You've seen athletes, for example, who are out on the floor, say, playing basketball. And I remember watching Michael Jordan years ago, and I could just see that there would be a time when he would get this look in his eyes, and you could tell that he was in the zone. And when he got in the zone, it seemed like he played like magic. He would dodge people, he would steal balls, he would run and make layups and things like that, and he was just unstoppable. Well, every writer has a writer's zone too, and you need to learn how to get into that. So I'm going to talk about how you get into the writer's zone. First of all, you've got to prepare to write. Trying to write for 3 minutes a day or something silly like that doesn't quite do it. It doesn't allow you to get into the meditative state that you need to be in. What it does is it keeps you anxious. It keeps you working as fast as you can. You can get some good work done in only 3 or 5 or 10 minutes a day, but it's not the same as getting into the zone. It doesn't allow you the time to do that. And so you want to relax into it. Allow yourself to say, I'm going to take this next 3 hours or so to write. And it really does take a couple of hours for a lot of people to get into that deep meditative state where they're writing well. Once you've decided that you're going to do that, you need to sit down in a place that's comfortable for you. If your back is hurting, you're not going to be able to get into the writer's zone very well. If you are in a room that's dusty and you're coughing and hacking and that kind of thing, you're not going to be able to get into the writer's zone. It's a meditative trance is actually what it is. And here's how you get into it. First thing that I like to do if I'm working on a novel is I'll sit down and I'll think about what I want to write. I give myself a few minutes. I've got to come up with a character, and I've got to come up with a place where the story happens, and I have to come up with a major conflict, and I start working with those. It doesn't have to be anything really important, but I might want to say this scene is going to happen at night, and these 3 characters are going to be in it, and I might start thinking about what kind of a night it is, and where they're going, and what they're going to do, and what's going to happen at the end of the scene. What's going to be changing in the course of the story. And so I sit down and I try to get myself into a trance-like state. Now, when you're sitting here, let's say you're going through your day, you're just getting off work and you're driving around, you're going home and you're thinking, oh, I've got to stop at the store and pick up these 3 items, and then I've got to go home and feed the cat, and then I can watch baseball tonight at 8 o'clock or something like that. When you're in that state, that's called the beta state of consciousness. It's kind of a high energy state where your brain is working at about 14.5 to 40 hertz, and that's the state that we're in when we are contemplating things, when we're thinking, when we're active. When we get into the writing zone, though, we are moving into a deeper meditative state. Your brain slows down. It actually is very much like going into a trance. And we move from that beta state into what's called the alpha state, where our brain moves at a slower pace. And you can get yourself there very, very quickly simply by doing this. You've thought about your scene for a few minutes. About this time, I very often will take a moment and I will write a hook. Hook is just a little bit of information that makes the reader want to read. It promises that a story is going to happen. And I've got entire lessons on hooks and different kinds of hooks and which ones have been used for some different novels in the past and that kind of thing. But I'll sit down and I'll say something interesting. For example, I might say, The most glorious and blessed day of Eva's short life was the day that her mother passed away. Okay? Now, that's a hook. You sit down and you'll say, wait a minute. Somebody's mother dying is terrible. That couldn't possibly be true. But I've just promised to tell you a story about the day that Eva's mother has passed away. And I tell you that she has a short life, so you know that Eva's probably a child, okay, or maybe a teen. We don't know anything about the story yet, but it's just enough for you to say, wait a minute, what's going on here? And that creates a mystery. When that happens, your brain releases dopamine, which basically is a reward for the reader that says, okay, there's a mystery here. Keep on trying to figure out how to solve it, and maybe we'll come to a bigger reward. And so people become eager to read. It'll buy you a couple of pages of interest, okay? That's all I'm trying to do by creating a hook. And there are hundreds of ways to create hooks. Now, once I've done that, I start a process that's very simple. I have to give certain information. I have to transport my reader into the story. This is very important. The best-selling books of all time have all been books that are big on transporting the reader to another time and another place. So, I want to transport my reader into the story. I think about my protagonist. Who am I telling this story about? I'm going to be telling it from their point of view. And I ask myself two simple questions. What is this character doing? Okay. And how do they feel? What emotion is being aroused at the time that this story takes place? And I start writing about that. I don't have to write eloquently. I'm not really trying to impress anybody necessarily. Some of the very best stories are invisible. The reader doesn't notice that there's an author behind the curtain even, okay? So I'm just sitting here, not trying to impress you, just putting some thoughts down on paper. And I have to remember, this is just my first draft. It's not important. I can throw it all away if I want to. If I make a mistake, I'll come back and fix it later. And so don't get all bound up and worried about how great your prose is. It's not going to be deathless on your first attempt. So I sit down and I start writing. Where is my character? What are they doing? And how do they feel? Okay, that's called the kinesthetic appeal. We're appealing to kinesthetic senses. Sense of motion, sense of emotion. The next thing I ask myself is, what does my character hear? Okay, what kind of sounds are there? Now, there may be ambient sounds in the background. Okay, it might be birds singing and twittering or something like that. Or it may be that there are people speaking, and I want to hear that. Or maybe all of those sounds are being drowned out by my protagonist's internal thoughts. Okay, that too is a sound. They might be thinking about what's happening to them. Next, I want to go to the third appeal, which is the appeal to sight. Most people, when we're walking around in the waking world, sight is probably the strongest appeal. It's the one that most people are geared to pay attention to. And so I'll describe what my character sees. But I describe all of this from the point of view of the character. You've often heard people say when writing that you should show, don't tell. Well, when I appeal to my senses, then I'm showing. I'm not telling, okay? I don't say he went to the store. I describe him going to the store. What did he see when he was going to the store? What did he hear? What was he thinking when he went to the store? Why would he want to go to the store? All of those kinds of questions. When I do that, that's called a KAV cycle. And the goal here is to simply get the reader to imagine him or herself in that spot, to imagine themselves doing this kind of thing, okay? And I write that down, and at the end of the sentence, the character will have heard or seen something new, and that will lead to a new emotional state, and possibly it will lead them to change their actions so that they now begin doing something new. I was walking down to the store. I heard the sound of rapid gunfire. I whirled and saw a large man with a semi-machine gun firing into the crowd. What do? Well, you're probably gonna turn tail and run, okay? Or maybe you're the heroic type. Maybe you're going to charge straight at that person and try to save some lives, okay? So that's a KAV cycle. What I want to do is I want to repeat that. Once my scene changes, my character takes action, and we tell what happens again. What were they doing or thinking? What were they feeling? What do they do in response? What do they hear? And what do they see? Once you've gone through one KAV cycle, where you've given the kinesthetic, the audio, and the visual sensory detail, you go ahead and you do it again. Okay, you tell us what happened next and what happened again. The point isn't to describe things perfectly. The point here is for you to be exercising your mind. It's for you to create the story and begin to make it alive. Okay, now you're going to want to include tactile sensations, what your character feels, hot, cold, wet, dry, rough, smooth, that kind of thing, but also smells, whatever that's appropriate, so that you bring all of the senses into it. So you have to remember as you're starting to do this that you're really reaching deep into your mind. That's why your brain actually slows down. It starts going back into your occipital lobe and back into your hindbrain and to various parts of your brain to sort of reach in and say, now what does it feel like? What does that smell like? What would really happen next? And as that happens, you start making discoveries. The story becomes alive for you and for the reader. As you do this, you get deeper and deeper into the zone. After you do it for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, actually begin writing better, and you're exploring ways, kind of subconsciously, to make the story better as you go. You'll be thinking about better ways that your characters can phrase things, or better ways to handle your description. You might be thinking of metaphors or similes that will help you describe things. And so by doing that slowly, you get into the zone. You begin writing quicker too. You'll very often find that as you start doing this, that your writing speed will increase. It'll double and triple, so that you may start out writing 2 pages an hour, and all of a sudden you find that you're at 4 or 6 or 8 pages an hour, depending upon your typing speed. And that's how you basically get into the zone. When you do it, you find it's a very pleasurable thing. It actually helps you feel excited. You feel happy. You feel like you've accomplished something. You're creating your story a little bit at a time. And that's how writers write, okay? That's how we do it every day, day after day, and it's why we do it. So you want to make sure that as you're getting into the zone that really you understand that this is the way that you get into it. It's not by going to writing groups and talking about writing. It's not by reading a bunch of books until you figure out all the secrets. It's by sitting down and practicing it day after day.